Okay, the other big sort of technical support question that we often get is about 10-bit color. So 10-bit color is about color integrity. It's about the quality of the signal that travels between the monitor, between the computer and the monitor. Typically, with most computers, that's an 8-bit signal, which means that red, green, and blue can each have a level value between 0 and 255. 10-bit color is much higher quality. It allows you to have many more levels, many more gradations of color, which in theory results in smoother transitions and better tone mapping at the monitor end. The problem with 10-bit color is that it can be a significant amount of hassle to get it working. It does take some expense, and in many ways it's often not worth the effort. Now I'll take you through all of that and I'll show you how to do it, but the key thing to understand is that for most people, working in 10-bit color is by no means essential, and it's definitely not worth losing sleep over. Okay, so to cover the sort of somewhat easier scenario, I'll talk about Mac first. If you have a modern up-to-date Mac, which is essentially from about mid-2016 onwards, you will get 10-bit support out of the box. All of the video cards support 10-bit in the current laptops and the Mac Mini and so on. They all support 10-bit, and as long as you connect things with a modern digital cable, you will get 10-bit support and it will enable itself automatically. So it's quite a simple thing. On the PC, it used to be easier on the PC than on the Mac, where it just simply wasn't possible, but now it's slightly harder on the PC and all. On the PC, it's important that you have what's called a workstation video card. So to clarify that, there are two types of 10-bit. There's kind of consumer video desktop 10-bit, the more kind of generic deep color 10-bit, that most people in internet forums, when people are talking about 10-bit color, that's what you'll come across. And then there is the professional 10-bit, the OpenCL acceleration 10-bit for things like Photoshop and so forth. They're two completely different things, and they're very often misunderstood. To get your professional applications working in 10-bit, you need a workstation video card. So that basically means an NVIDIA Quadro or an ATI FirePro card. These are quite different cards. You know, you can go out and spend $600 or $700 on a high-end gaming card. It will not help you achieve 10-bit in professional contexts. You do need a workstation card. The other great benefit of workstation cards are that their drivers are vastly more reliable and vastly less buggy, so you just experience many less crashes and so on. The game cards, while they're very powerful for the money, tend to have really buggy drivers because they're constantly trying to optimize for, you know, whatever the latest first-person shooter or Fortnite game is. And the negative result of that is that they have lots of problems in professional applications. So I can't stress this strongly enough. If you're building a new PC, or if you have the option, make sure you get a workstation card. ATI FirePro or NVIDIA Quadro card. Now, this, for example, I think has an older model, something like a P620. Through most of the machines in the office, we use the P4000 machines that are amply powerful enough for imaging use. And they do all of the tasks that we do here with absolutely no problem at all. And in fact, you can run up to 4 4K monitors off them. So they've got grunt to spare, no problem at all. So, how do you actually turn it on once you have a video card? Well, there's really two levels to this. The first is the operating system level. You need to turn it on there, and then the second is the application level. You need to make sure that the application is turning on 10-bit. So I'll show you how to do it, and then I'll talk about why it doesn't really necessarily solve all your 10-bit problems and is perhaps not worth the effort anyway. But it is worth doing, and particularly in some contexts like video editing and so on, you definitely do want 10-bit color if you can get it. So it's worth knowing how to do it. So here we have the NVIDIA control panel. I've opened it up, and basically it has its control down here. You've got what bit depth of the color to send and the output color depth. This is the main control to enable 10 bits per channel to go between the computer and the monitor. So this is the first place that we have to turn it on. So we turn it on and we apply it, and you'll see it takes a few moments to work itself out. And now we have 10 bits of color going at the general desktop level. So that's how you would just achieve it, and if you want to watch your movies in 10-bit and so on, that's the basics of it there. By the way, you saw a little message pop up when I did that. That was actually just the monitor telling us that it needs to be calibrated, which is one of the really handy features of the BenQ monitor, is it reminds you when you do need to go through the calibration process. So you don't need to rely on your own memory or a little software application to pop up and tell you, which tends to be a bit unreliable. You get an actual physical message on the monitor itself. But that wasn't per se related to the 10-bit. Okay, so we've turned on 10-bit at the operating system level. The next thing to do is turn 10-bit on at the application level. So what we're going to do is we're going to start Photoshop up, which is for many people the main application that they would care about. And we're going to enable 10-bit support in Photoshop itself. The important thing to understand though is that Photoshop is not fully implemented in 10-bit. So while you can achieve 10-bit display in Photoshop, very often as soon as you do anything complex in Photoshop, and that includes things like adjustment layers and certain filters, they are not implemented in 10-bit. So Photoshop will automatically and without telling you drop back its display to 8-bit, and you'll essentially have only 8-bit display anyway in that application. And that tends to happen a fair bit when you're working on images. So it is, you know, you spend all this effort, time and money trying to get 10-bit working on, Photoshop will fairly transparently drop you back to 8-bit when it needs to anyway. So it's not really something worth stressing about, because the reality is that very often, even if you have it all set up working correctly on either platform, you don't actually end up using it in practice. I'll just open up an image because it will get grumpy with me to there. Give me 1 sec. Ooh, actually, just create a new image, that'll do. Yep. Okay, so the 10-bit control in Photoshop lives in its preferences section under the performance section. Under here we have a little control panel that controls all of the Photoshop performance settings, and in particular we have the graphics processor settings. First of all, we want to make sure that Use Graphics Processor is ticked. This means that the graphics processor is used to accelerate all sorts of functions in Photoshop. And without that, Photoshop performance tends to be a real dog. So you really want to make sure that's turned on, because otherwise you're using your CPU for everything, and you'll soon find that you get vastly less good performance. So we make sure that's ticked, and then we go into Advanced Settings. Under Advanced Settings here, you can see various settings, use OpenCL and so on. The important one is 30-bit display. 30-bit display is exactly the same as 10-bit because it's 10 bits per channel, red, green and blue. 3 channels, 3 times 10 is 30. So 10-bit and 30-bit are the same thing. It's a common point of confusion. If we turn this on here, click OK, we now have Photoshop working in 10 bits per channel. Nothing changed. Well, what Photoshop should tell you is that you do need to restart Photoshop to get it to pick things up. And with any luck, it will now start up in 10 bits per channel mode. You still won't see any actual practical difference though. Most images, and this is the key thing, 99% of images are going to display identically on an 8-bit setup and a 10-bit setup. The only area where you're really going to see any difference with 10-bit images is extraordinarily smooth gradients. And quite frankly, I, in 15 or more years of professional retouching work, have literally never once seen a practical occasion where 10-bit made a practical quality difference to work. That's how unimportant it is. If you're a fine art black and white aficionado and all you shoot is abstract, you know, Edward Weston style images, extremely smooth gradients on capsicums, for example, you might be one of the very rare people who genuinely needs 10-bit. But the reality is the vast bulk of work will look, display and edit identically on your screen in 8 or 10-bit. So definitely don't lose any sleep over it. So just opening this up, we'll just go back into the preferences and just check that everything went to plan. It is a fussy area of Photoshop, so I do like to explicitly check it, but here you can see 30 display is now turned on and ticked. That means that wherever possible, Photoshop will now be using 10-bit per channel color to display those smooth gradients as smoothly as possible. Again, problem solved.